Okay, good morning, everyone, or guess good afternoon. I want to welcome you to a Q&A webinar with our new author, John J. Murray Jr., who has written a new paralegal book for us called Introduction to Law, a real, relevant, and relatable approach to paralegals 1E. So today we have John. John, do you want to give a little wave? People can see you. Yes. John is with us. He hails from Alvin Community College in Alvin, Texas, where he is the paralegal director of the school and recently also named dean of the Legal Studies Division, which includes paralegal, criminal justice, and the Law Enforcement Academy. So this is a brand new post for John. And so in the middle of writing a book and every other thing that he's accomplishing, he was also just given this new administrative role. So John, I want to welcome you. And I actually want to turn it over to you to tell us a little bit about yourself and explain why you decided to take this project on and what do you see as its key attributes in the marketplace.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thank you to Denise and Allison and Aspen for the opportunity here. I've enjoyed I've enjoyed finishing the process. We'll put it that way. I think the writing the book itself is a journey all to its own. But thanks for everybody who's jumping in here on the call. What kind of got me going here is this is kind of the end of a long road for me, or maybe it's the beginning of a new road. But I've been an attorney for 20 years. When I graduated from law school, I went into the JAG Corps, and I've always enjoyed writing. But I've always enjoyed kind of figuring out how to write and engage with students and audiences. So one of the positions I had in the JAG Corps was I was a law instructor at the United States Army Military Police School. And there I was engaging with students from all across the world. Basically, we had officers, we had enlisted soldiers, we had foreign students who were coming in, and I was teaching criminal law, military justice, the law of war to anyone who was kind of processing through the military police school. And at night, I was an adjunct professor, so I was teaching family members of soldiers law classes. And it was interesting, the dynamic between having rank during the day and no rank at night, and how do you somehow still teach the law to a varied audience. Once I got out of the JAG Corps, I went into private practice, where then I was really kind of doing complex litigation cases, and a lot of the stories that I brought out in the book are real stories that I'm telling about, kind of crazy cases that I worked on, and in the words of Hamilton, kind of being in the room where it happens. And that's what I'm trying to do for students and even professors in this book, is taking it out of the typical textbook reading and putting it into a context of how can we engage students through this kind of long experience that I've had in, the JAG Corps, in private practice, and now teaching paralegal students since 2020 in a paralegal program where I've taught all the classes. I've gone through many versions of the classes. I've gone through many variations of Introduction to Law textbooks. So how can I kind of take all of this and put it into an Introduction to Law textbook that is going to start the program out right off the bat for whoever's using this textbook on just a really positive and engaging and exciting track, rather than having Introduction to Law just kind of be a class that people have to take to get on with the stuff that I really want to take criminal law. Okay, well, let's make Introduction to Law a class that you really want to take, or that you really look back on and say, I really enjoyed that class. So that's kind of a little bit about me, and a little bit about why I wrote the book here.
So, John, there's a lot to cover in this class, and there are many ways to move through the material. What were you trying to accomplish in terms of how you structured the book, and how do you yourself use the material that you've given here in a one semester course?
Yeah. So my thought was, as I've kind of used different Introduction to Law textbooks throughout the years here, what I noticed was a lot of Introduction to Law textbooks spend about half to three-fourths of the time on the substantive areas that paralegals will have later on in a paralegal program. The substantive areas like criminal law, civil litigation, contracts, and each chapter will be divided into those substantive areas. So you're spending weeks kind of traipsing through them, which isn't a bad thing, because I know a lot of course objectives say you're going to cover that material. On the other hand, it kind of makes Introduction to Law just a precursor to all of those other classes. So you're basically teaching, and then in those classes, you're reteaching some of the stuff that you already taught in Introduction to Law. And I wanted to kind of change the dynamic of that. I wanted Introduction to Law to be a class that excites students and gets them not only that material, but other material that they won't have in other classes. I want to set the stage for them to have a wider approach to law. So the way I've kind of set up this material and the way I use it is, the beginning of the book starts with, what is a paralegal? Let's jump into what is a paralegal, because sometimes we have students who just sign up for the paralegal program because they're interested in the law, but they really don't understand or appreciate what a paralegal is, or how a paralegal position ever came to be to begin with. So I've actually gone through and I've traced kind of the history of how a paralegal came to be a position that they are now entering a profession for. And I want them to have that sense of ownership and that sense of pride and that sense of, this is a profession. It's not just a class. And in a year and a half, in 2 years, you are going to be out in the world working as a paralegal, and people are going to be relying on you in their lowest moments. This is not just a class that you're coming to study. It's a career. It's a calling. So I try to start the book with this kind of introduction to what is a paralegal, chapter 1, chapter 2, ethics. And okay, now that we know what a paralegal is, what are some of the things that kind of rein in the legal field and paralegals and attorneys, and how do attorneys and paralegals work together? And then chapter 3 is, all right, well, now that we kind of have an understanding of the parameters of the paralegal, let's talk about, why do we have the law? What is the law? And a lot of Introduction to Law textbooks just kind of skip over that. They just jump into, all right, let's talk about courts. Let's talk about substantive areas. But before we ever get there, when else are we going to talk about why do we have the law but an Introduction to Law class? So to me, this isn't necessarily an introduction to other classes I'm going to teach in the program. It's an introduction to law. So let's have in-depth kind of conversations about what's right, what's wrong, what should we do, what shouldn't we do. And if we have those conversations, now you see the students' eyes open and they're like, holy cow, this is interesting. I never thought about it this way. This is something that I'm really engaged in. And then when you get into some of those, okay, let's talk about courts. Now you see, if you start talking about a judge and how a judge makes a decision, they understand the dilemma that they have, because just last chapter you were saying, well, I don't know, that's tough. Do I pick greatest good for the greatest number, or do I pick protect the minority? But they have a framework to have that conversation now and think about the substantive areas, the court process in a new way. So the middle of the book gets into the substantive areas, but they have a framework to discuss that based on the foundation that's set up at the beginning. Later on in the book, then we talk about some of the things that, all right, how do you deal with the end of a case? We talk about trials and appeals, of course, but I also build in to the material alternative dispute resolution. I have an LLM in dispute resolution, and I think it's important for students to be exposed to dispute resolution. A lot of introduction to law textbooks spend about, a paragraph talking about mediation and a paragraph talking about arbitration. 98% of cases get resolved before a trial. So if we're not preparing students for that 98% of cases and we're focusing solely on trials, appeals, and court process, then to me, we're doing an injustice in what we're teaching as an introduction to law, because alternative dispute resolution, negotiation. I spend a chapter talking about negotiation. One of the reviewers for the text mentioned that the chapter on negotiation was that chapter alone was why they would want to adopt the book, because nobody teaches negotiation. I talk about apology and forgiveness. How can we train paralegals to have conversations with clients about apology? How do we forgiveness? Sometimes we send our paralegals out to the client who's emotional at the end of a case and just say, deal with it. How does the paralegal just deal with it? How does the paralegal deal with biases, their own, their clients, the law's biases? So what I've tried to do in this book is give a broad perspective of, let's not just spend chapter after chapter talking about substantive areas. Let's talk about what it's like in all the different angles that are going to be coming into play for a paralegal at the same time we're making this material exciting for them to read.
That sounds great. I noticed, I just want to punctuate what you said. There are 2 chapters on one on negotiation, followed by a chapter on alternative dispute resolution. And I think having these 2 chapters does tie in nicely with your subtitle, which I love, a real relevant and relatable approach for paralegals. Just let's really hit them with information and content they'll need to be successful practicing paralegals. I think, yeah, really nice angle. Well, thank you for that. So John, can you walk us through you've worked really hard, I can say, as your managing editor, worked really hard on some of the feature set that runs through the book. And a lot of times the big lessons are learned by students paying attention to what's called out in the text, especially when chapters are loaded with material. So tell us a little bit about the roadmap for your feature set.
Sure. It's an interesting story. When I told my best friend that I was going to write a textbook, he said, "So now you want to write a book that nobody's going to read?" So I always had that in the back of my mind as I was writing this textbook. And I wanted to write a textbook that students actually wanted to read, that they wanted to be engaged with, that they look forward to coming to each week. And the way that I thought that I could do that was, I use humor throughout the book. I try to tell not only the serious stories of the law, which there's plenty of those to go around, but some of the funny stories. I tell them in one chapter about the case of the Tidy Whities, where I was a prosecutor and I had a defendant come up to me, and he said that he should get off from his speeding ticket because it was a necessity. And I said, well, what was the necessity? And he held up a Ziploc bag with his tidy whities in them. And he said, I had to go to the bathroom so bad that I was speeding to get to the bathroom. And here's my exhibit. They're my tidy whities from that day. So I try to tell some humorous stories to get students to engage with the material, and what is this guy going to tell me next? What story is he going to tell me next? And make those inserts not something that students just skip over. I want them to want to pause and read the case examples that I'm giving. The other thing I like to do is throughout the book, the style of it is more of a storytelling kind of style. And I think there's plenty of research out there that will say that if you can get someone to make an emotional connection to your writing, not just an intellectual connection, but an emotional connection, they're not only going to retain it more, but they're going to want to keep coming back to it. So, there's a reason why, as attorneys, when I'm in front of a jury, I'm going to give a jury a theme. I'm going to tell them a story. I'm not going to just tell them what the evidence says because they're going to fall asleep. I want to tell them a story to engage them and keep them coming along with me as I'm trying to get them to reach the conclusions that I need them to reach. Within that, though, I want it to be relatable through storytelling and humor, but I want it to be real. So with real, I'm not only giving them real cases to read and real examples, but I have throughout the text great paralegal tips. And these great paralegal tips come from my years of practice and working with paralegals, where if we're talking about, discovery, within the discovery, I'm putting little inserts of here's a great paralegal tip to keep in mind when you're dealing with discovery. Here's a great paralegal tip for ethics. With ethics, we have sticky wickets that are built into the material, and those sticky wickets give real kind of examples for ethical dilemmas all throughout the book, not only in the ethics chapter, but all throughout the book. I deal with here's an ethical problem that could come up in criminal law or an ethical problem that could come up in contracts. And once you see that sticky wicket, you know that that's going to be an ethical dilemma that you can engage with your students on and have a discussion that now uses the material to frame an ethical dispute. Another thing that I've kind of tried to build in is thinking about our audience right now. Our students, a lot of them very engaged in social media. And with social media, I don't know about each of you, but every day I'm getting, here's a quote from a famous person, or here's, something to ponder. And I'll get that just pops up on my feed. And some of those I dismiss. I don't know why this person sent this to me, but other ones really kind of make me think. And like, oh, I never thought about it that way, or maybe I should think about that some more, and maybe I'll forward it on and I'll share it with someone. So within each chapter, I wanted to build in different quotes from not only legal people, not only judges, and not only quotes from cases, but from celebrities, from common people, from all across the board, so I could make this relatable, the material, and take it outside of just being a legal text to maybe this quote resonates with you and it incorporates the material and it gets you to think about it differently. Within each chapter, we have visuals, and the visuals, some people learn not by reading, but by looking at visuals. So we've been very intentional on creating visuals throughout the chapter that will help students retain the information in a different way. And the last thing I kind of say is I've always kind of found, a lot of textbooks will put discussion questions or review questions at the end of the chapter. You've gone through 30 pages and you get to the end of the chapter and there's discussion questions that nobody ever reads unless they're assigned. Respond to discussion question number 2 on page 181. Well, for me, I want this to be a conversation throughout the chapter with the students. So I've built in discussion questions all throughout the material. So if I have a case excerpt, I have my own discussion questions built into the case excerpt that will say, while you're reading this, how are you thinking about this on the spot? And have students actually ponder that and work through that. Within the sticky wickets, there's discussion questions. Within the different quotations, I just gave you this quotation. What do you think about that? How do you kind of analyze that? How do you apply that to what we've just discussed? And I want it to be that kind of almost like this is me giving a lecture and we are in person and we're having this conversation as I'm writing and as the student is reading the chapter. So those are some of the things I've tried to build into each chapter, and I've tried to be very, again, intentional on why I've done those things to make it real, relevant, and relatable in each section of each chapter.
That's great, John. You mentioned cases and excerpted cases. I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more about how you went about picking cases and also what you did to make them accessible to the typical undergraduate introductory student. They're not reading huge cases. So as an author, what choices did you make there in regards to the cases?
Yeah, for me, I've always loved reading cases. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to, some of these cases get long. If you put the whole excerpt of a case into the text, a student's gonna just flip through 15 pages of the case and they're gonna get bogged down in it and they're not gonna read it. So what I've tried to do is go very specifically on one, choosing cases that are interesting to read and a student would want to read it and they really get to the point that I'm trying to make in that particular section very quickly. And by quickly, I mean I will take the piece of the case that is kind of dealing with that particular issue that I'm trying to get the student to understand or relate to. And from there, building in the discussion questions to further help the student understand or appreciate why did I pick this section of this case to read. We've eliminated a lot of the citation aspects throughout the body of, a lot of cases get bogged down and now you've got a string cite that lasts for 5 paragraphs and the students don't really understand or want to read all of that string cite. So we've eliminated a lot of that and we've gotten, these cases really kind of tied pretty tight into the text on here's something that is really going to be important for you to read. We've taken out the stuff that really doesn't impact this particular point that we're trying to make. And then we've built in some supporting questions and resources to try to help the student really appreciate why that portion of the case is there. But, there's plenty of cases out there, and I've really tried to pick cases that are either important for students to have some idea of, or they really got to the point of the material pretty quickly.
Yeah. Great, thank you. I'm sure it's not easy trying to figure out which cases to include and which to leave out. And I know many folks teaching this course really appreciate the leadership that an author shows there, and so we appreciate all that hard work with the case material, because it is challenging. Um, John, can you talk a little bit about the support materials that you've created so that one, moving to a new book is easier, and then also using your book just in general is easier?
Sure. Uh, you know, I teach, so I'm not writing this book as a book that I want it to be a burden on new people to use. I'm writing this from the perspective, I know what it's like to adopt a new book. I know that there's challenges with that, and you have to recreate your whole class and lectures and try to get up to speed on, okay, are these changes really worth the rub of me reinventing my class? I get it. I totally get it. Here, what I wanted to do was I wanted to make it as easy as possible for people to use this book, but not only use this book, but get excited about using the book. I want you to get excited about having Introduction to Law be a new way to motivate your students to really love your program from the first class that they take. Because a lot of times, Introduction to Law is the first class that they take in the program. So what I've done with the supporting materials is I've tried to do as much of the work as I can for you ahead of time. I've built out a syllabus, and the syllabus is pretty detailed. It'll give you options. If you are doing an online class, I've built out proposed discussion board questions for you within the syllabus. Um, I've built out proposed, here's a couple of different options for discussion boards. Which one do you like better? You insert it into your syllabus. Here's a couple of different suggestions for assignments that have worked well. And I've built it in a way of I've used these assignments. I've used these discussion boards. I know what the response for students will be to these questions, and I'm trying to kind of throw a softball to you these are tested and true, and they will have a good response from students. I've built out a test bank. So I've vetted questions that I've used in classes when I've taught this material. It's not just stuff that I'm throwing out there and throwing some questions together for you. I have a good combination of multiple choice questions where it's builds out a fact pattern and you have multiple choice questions, or it's a some mix of true false questions, or some just can you apply the material. I have a good test bank of discussion questions or exam essay questions where if you want to use those as an essay exam, you can use those. I've built out PowerPoints for every chapter, so you don't have to create the PowerPoints for the chapters. Again, that takes a lot of time to do. I know it, and it took a lot of time to put that together for the book here, to have it match the chapters. So for each of you, that's already done. It would be up to you if you want to tweak it to add your own identity and kind of personality into the PowerPoint slides, but the content is there for you already. Um, Even though I have discussion questions and that throughout each chapter, I also have at the end of each chapter, I have terms to review. I have, different discussion questions at the end of the chapter as well that you can use to build out assignments if you want to build. And then one of the things that I've mentioned, and I'd be happy to do this at any time with each of you, is if there's a topic, I know that, for example, apology and forgiveness, that's not taught in a lot of classes, and some might be kind of intimidated by taking on kind of that new area and say, well, how could I have a textbook that I'm not familiar with teaching something like that? I'd be happy to come and guest speak at a class of yours when you get to end of the chapter. If you want, you reach out to me and we can make an arrangement where I'll zoom into your class and give an apology and forgiveness, short discussion or something. But for the most part, like with negotiation, I walk through negotiation and I use a fact pattern where I go step by step by step by step. And by the end of it, it's really I think it's really going to excite you to get into these new areas and think about the law a little bit differently and how you could envision introduction to law.
That sounds fabulous. John, I would like to close with a question regarding paralegal studies and where, in your professional opinion, you think this is going, what changes are on the horizon, how professors might be thinking about some of these changes and incorporating them into their course. I know that, there's a lot going on right now, and maybe the most significant is the introduction of artificial intelligence and the use of it in law firms. And I'm wondering if you've got any comment about any of that. Take that in whatever direction you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I would kind of focus in on 2 points. One is AI, like you just mentioned, and the other I'll get to here in a minute. But let's talk about AI for a second. It's not going to go away. It's going to change the legal profession. It's going to change the way paralegals do their job. And what I tell my students all the time is that, as some of the drafting tasks and maybe even some of the research as AI gets better, maybe some of that changes. What isn't going to change for the paralegal is their ability or not ability to connect with clients and give a human touch to cases. One of the lectures that I give to my students is something that was passed down to me as a young attorney. And what was told to me is that my legal career would be defined based on how I arranged 4 letters. ELIF. ELIF. And you could use those 4 letters. You could spell them as file, or you could spell them as life. And your legal career will be defined on how you treat clients. You treat them as a file, or do you treat them as a life? For AI, every case is a file. And even for some attorneys, cases are files. You spin the wheel, you try to make money, you charge clients, you bill them, and when they don't have money anymore, you withdraw, and then you go on to the next client and you spin the wheel. But for the great attorneys, for the great paralegals, your legal career will be defined on how you could treat people as a life. And that's not going to go away. So within this textbook, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get paralegals to, yes, learn and appreciate the law and the substantive skills that they need, but I'm trying to give them an introduction into how do you treat people as a life.
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking about connections with clients and I'm going through different biases, those are real things that people decipher with people. When I'm talking about microfacial expressions and how we communicate with each other through expressions that we have, and I could determine that you're sad based on your expression to me, not through anything. AI can't read my expression yet. Maybe some of them can, but you don't have an AI computer scanning your clients' faces. You don't have your AI computer holding their hand when they're going to get a divorce. You don't have an AI computer saying, I know what that's like. You don't have an AI computer just sitting with someone in silence and letting them tell their story. So the law, yes, it's going to change from the how do you do the job standpoint, but some of the human component is never going to go away. Hopefully, it's not going to go away, and that's going to be something that we're going to lean on with paralegals even more, and how they could distinguish themselves from other paralegals that treat people as a file. The second piece I would say is, I practice and live in Texas now, and the Texas Supreme Court is just coming out with new rules where paralegals are able to advocate for clients in certain limited types of cases. And that, a lot of times when we're teaching paralegal ethics, we're teaching paralegals they cannot give legal advice. That's the hard and fast rule of legal ethics for paralegals. It distinguishes you from an attorney. Let the attorney give legal advice. The attorney passed the bar exam. The attorney has malpractice insurance. The attorney. But I think as more states might try to adopt this new kind of way, it's starting to get blended a little bit of what can a paralegal do and what can a paralegal do? What kind of case is the paralegal and the attorney working on? And I think as we kind of get to that setting, some of the things I'm covering in this Introduction to Law textbook become even more valuable. Because if a paralegal is now representing or able to advocate for a client in certain settings, how much more important is negotiation skills? How much more important is alternative dispute resolution skills to having the paralegal not only be familiar with what is mediation, but they might be called into a mediation on a particular case, and do they understand what that means and how to kind of go through the process and how it's different from some of these other formalities that we have to resolve cases. So I think those would be two comments I would make on the profession as a whole and where it might be going here in the future and how it might be changing, but how it might still be staying the same in ways.
Yes. You see the enrollment trends at your school pretty steady in regard to paralegal students?
Yeah, I'm always trying to grow, and I think it's growing. So I think we got a great program here. We're able to do a lot of exciting things, and have partnerships with different law firms where students get positions once they graduate from the program, and have a lot of different internship opportunities. So within the Houston area here, we have a lot of opportunities for students to kind of thrive within the program and then get employed once they get out of the program. So definitely, definitely a growing area, I think.
That's fabulous. Great. John, I want to give you a chance to add any other comments you might have, and then I think we've got some contact information we're going to share with everyone. John, I hope you don't mind. I put your email address right up here. I hope it's even,
Sure.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah, no worries.
So everyone, feel free to contact John with any questions you might have. And also Allison is our marketing manager at Aspen for the undergraduate list, and she's happy to help you with things. And I'm in editorial, so I'm happy to talk to you about any project in our program, any book in our program, as well as any future projects. So feel free to reach out to me as well. But want to give this over to Allison, who might have some closing comments for us.
Yeah, of course. So if anybody does have any questions about this title, please feel free to use the chat and we can get back to you. Other than that, John, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Well, the only thing I'd say is we mentioned it a little bit earlier. I know it's the first edition. It's sometimes a hassle to change over your courses to a new offering. What I hope for you is that if you give it a shot, you'll see that it could change your Introduction to Law class. and not only change your introduction to law class, but it could change the trajectory of your program. What I try to do in introduction to law with every class that comes through my program is I am as much teaching them content as motivating them to be great paralegals. And I think this book sets you up for that trajectory, not just to have a class that they're taking. Introduction to Law could sometimes, like I said before, just become a class that's a precursor to other classes. Have this class be something that is exciting and motivating and engaging and gives that first impression to your students that many of them have never had someone who actually believed in them or gave them a chance or told them that, they had faith in them. Have this class be that opportunity to connect with your students, and through the text, give them a way to get excited about learning the law in a way that is going to have them want to read the book, rather than just be, I have to read the book to memorize something. I think if you give the book a chance, that's what you'll find it gives to you. So thanks for your time and the chance to have a moment with you.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate it. Does anybody have any questions at all before we go?
Let's take a look. I do not see any at the moment, but if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to us or your sales rep, and we're happy to answer it for you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, John. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.